Hello, everyone, and welcome to our CPQ Strategies webinar. My name is Tomu, and I'm a business development manager with StandDev today. And we're joined with Greg Davis, the co-founder of Veloce, and Pratik, the CCO of StandDev. So a little background on both companies, starting with StandDev. StandDev is a systems implementer that delivers code-to-cash solutions with a team of over 45 consultants. And we have delivered these solutions to Fortune 500 companies. And we see an average of 32% of increase in sales and productivity in our over 50 plus QDC implementations. And for Veloce, I'll hand it over to Greg and he can kick off the webinar.
Hey, thank you, Tomu. Thanks for the introduction. So Veloce, we're the next generation CPQ platform that's powered by a very unique technology. We call it an intelligent solver. What it really allows, it's so different in that it can solve an entire CPQ problem in a single click. What's also interesting is that underlying that, we have an exceptionally fast or an efficient algorithm for that solver that allows us to solve every single click 20 times faster than existing CPQ platforms that we know of. And that means that if you put those things together, you basically have something that's orders of magnitude faster, and also we're able to handle much larger data sets. So that's our background, and actually we're able to do that. What's underpinning all that is a tremendous amount of experience that our team, especially our founders, have been in the business of CPQ, starting in the C area, for the last 20 years. And we've done implementations for a number of Fortune 500 companies with all the end-to-end details. So what that means is that we're able to do what we're able to do today, and that will power the rest of your presentation. So the first thing we want to talk about is selecting the right CPQ. So you imagine you're in this situation where you've been wowed by all the demos. So be guaranteed that any software company can put together really nice demos. But the real problem is, how do you break that down? How do you dig under the covers? So I'll try and, we're trying to lend our experience here, because I've been on all sides of the problem personally. So I've been with vendor technologies, a couple different of them. I've also been customer, and I've been SI, that is systems integrators. I've been on all levels, so we do have a lot of perspective there that we want to share. So in terms of product, that's really where you're going to start. It's extremely important to find out what is demoware and what are actual features that you see in those demos that are powered by the core technology. The reason for that is because it's not that the vendor companies are necessarily trying to fool you. Actually, pretty much the way the mindset of software is, the software is very mutable. It's very changeable. It could be that that feature is on the roadmap. It's going to be tomorrow. And so sometimes there are shortcuts made. That's just the way things are done, because again, it'll be delivered soon. So for example, coming from my experience on the vendor side, I know that I've been involved in situations where I've personally developed very impressive demos that look great on the front end. They don't actually exist in the product yet, but we're transparent in that we'll say, well, this is coming down the road. You really need to dig into it. So now switching to what I would say the very best companies on the customer side that I've seen. So I was personally on the vendor side recently, where there was a very, let's say, intelligent customer or potential customer, and they came armed with their, first of all, with a strong skepticism, but openness at the same time. And they looked at the superficiality of the demo, and they came with exact use cases, and I'll step more into that. But they really knew what they wanted. They had a specific demo made for them. And then they asked, and this was brilliant because most customers don't do that. They actually asked, can we get the keys to your environment? Can we play with it? Can we look at how this was actually developed? It's extremely important because there have been massive sales done, huge sales done broadly across major companies that have been based on a few demos. And later, those companies have found out that actually the core product doesn't even support what they bought. Then you're in trouble. So this is a really important process. Now, platform. Just make sure that everything in your existing infrastructure will be supported. So for example, your ERP, your billing, your order management, and we'll go more into detail with this. And of course, your CRM, everything that you need to integrate with. And keep in mind that a company that is advertising that they do all of those things, it might not be exactly the best fit for you, and we'll step more into that later in the presentation. What that means is that if they're providing all the infrastructure, typically a company, no one does everything perfectly, no one does everything the best. Actually, what we're seeing is that best of breed solutions are the leading and the best ways to go, and you probably have those already. So just keep in mind that things should integrate and work well with your existing platforms. Performance capability. So this is super, super important. And you really, again, have to look under the covers. And you have to look at exactly what use cases you need to do with your company. So for example, the demos might not be tailored. The original demos, there might be some standard demos that look very good. You need to actually ask for demonstration of what your company needs, and then look at performance. Why is performance important? It's about usability and adoption. So if you create something with this technology and it actually gets deployed, and then you find that it lags, that it takes seconds to perform routine tasks or any task, especially in comparison to the tools that you already have. So for example, you're typically or historically sales use spreadsheets. So spreadsheets perform extremely well and they're very familiar. So if you get into something that doesn't perform well, your sales users will know that immediately. So you really need to look at that, and again, against your actual use cases. And that also is about capability, right? So don't accept broad capability. Take the time. Again, why do you take the time to look at all these things? Because typically CPQ is not a one-off. You're establishing a long-term relationship with this vendor and this technology. So you really want to take the time to do that properly. We've seen a lot of things go down super fast. When I was with vendor technologies, people would they would grab things because why? Well, the company was in the Magic Quadrant in Gartner, a few superficial things. They're all happy with it. Then they find out later it doesn't actually serve their needs. And again, the performance and capability is not there. Personalization. This is, again, all about user experience and adoption, and performance goes into this. But personalization means, can you get the user experience and user interface that actually you want to have or that you need? Don't accept a single one-size-fits-all approach. There are some technologies, there are a few companies that do offer personalization out of the box. So, and keep in mind, personalization should not be hacked together through customization. That's an extremely important point. Personalization should be something that the company has already thought about and offers through some tool set so that you don't have to go off and start writing, for example, Apex code and creating your own thing. Because why? Because that's extremely, first of all, it's difficult to do. It doesn't align with that product's development and future evolution. And also that you're going off on a path where you're going to have to maintain that. So what happens when you want some sort of change or the APIs change? So really the personalization has to be thought through by the company, by the vendor. And there's huge reasons for that. And we'll go into, just one simple thing is that you may want multi-channel and multiple user types. So for example, if you have a user who is, let's say, highly technical and wants to look at the details, that's going to be a completely different user interface than, say, your high-level salesperson who isn't interested in those details. Maybe they just want to get a quote done quickly. So you should look for technologies, and again, there are some that support that, where you can support multiple user types. And do that with an out-of-the-box technology, not with customization. Latest technology, the web is an amazing place. So there are new technologies that are coming up all the time, HTML5, lots of amazing JavaScript libraries. I'm talking about the front end first of all. What that means is that look at the technology and where it's been, ask the questions. Can I integrate, for example, my favorite charting, my visualization, or there are amazing 3D visualization technologies that are coming up. Can I integrate that? Even if I don't need that today, maybe I'll need that in the future. So again, latest technology on the front end. So natural extensibility within the existing framework that's been thought out, not hacks and customization. And then on the back end, what are they using? So for example, there are technologies that run platform agnostic. They're not tied into just one single platform. It means they're portable. It means they're fast, or they can potentially be fast. All of these things. So definitely you need to get your IT group involved. Don't buy something just because it's sitting in a pretty place on the Magic Quadrant. Look into the details. Look at what technologies are there. Make sure that they're implementing everything that's available. Now, business process, that's like also a major area to look into. So don't come without knowing what you want to do. So when you start this vendor selection, hopefully you've gotten to the point where you know you would need a CPQ system. You have an existing sales process. You have an existing way of doing things. You have data sets. You have use cases. Document that. That's what I saw when I described what the smartest customer or potential customers, how they've behaved. Model that, and I can tell you they come with very specific requirements, documented use cases of exactly what they want to see, and they represent really, they're a representation of what they need. Data. Come with specific data. You don't have to share your exact data. Mock it up, but have data that represents what you need. See how that can be handled. Again, don't accept the standard demos that they're going to show you. That's just a starting point. That should just be in the videos. When you engage with these companies, they have the resources and the time, if you're a real customer, to build something specific for you. So again, come with your process, your requirements, specific data, make them do some work for you. And then be open-minded to streamlining your current process. So what I've seen in my 20 years of experience is that some companies, they come and they have some specific ideas but they've never built CPQ. And so their specific ideas might not, for example, for some user interface treatments, it might not be the best way of doing things. So be open-minded, because the CPQ company should actually have some ideas about how best to implement your user interface or your flow or your entire process. So be open to that, but also question it at the same time. And then best practices. So CPQ is intrinsically complex by its nature. And so be aware that companies that are selling these solutions and these technologies, they should have best practices. If they don't have best practices established, then they probably don't have a lot of successful implementations, and you need to be wary of that. So again, come armed with your requirements, your specific data, be open-minded about changes, but question them, and then also look for best practices and see if they make sense. A real quality vendor should definitely have best practices. So talking about Veloce Intelligent Solver, I mentioned that earlier. It's a unique technology, and it allows our engine to solve problems of any level of complexity and size in a single click, and that's a massive change for CPQ. When you're getting into when you're looking at how the engine can solve the problem, you want to look at your products and how you structure your products, and not have the technology drive how you model your products. So you should be able to sell your products as is, with minor attribution, that is data-driven attribution of your product data. What that means is that, for example, we've seen customers where they have massive SKU proliferation because they have to change their products to support the tool's capabilities or lack of capabilities. So for example, to sell into different geographies, they have to create different SKUs, a SKU for Europe, for example, a SKU for North America, and then imagine how that can explode to every single little geography that you're selling to. So this is actually an extremely common problem. A flexible engine that's properly architected does not handle it that way. The product, you can come with exactly how your products are and their definitions, and then the engine can flex and be modeled such that you'll be able to sell exactly the same product into different geographies. You'll be able to sell it in different ways, but not by changing the actual products of themselves and creating new products just for those cases. So really keep that in mind, and that Veloce engine supports that, and other technologies too as well. So definitely look for that. So again, some technologies, and Veloce in particular, because we have our intelligent solver that can solve the whole problem in one shot, we also have ways to define rules more at a higher level, heuristically, typically as constraint statements. And what it does is it lends itself to a much easier and high performance, first of all, execution of your rules, but also maintenance, which becomes super, super important. So we'll step into that more. But essentially, we're able to express exactly the problem versus setting up a huge complex nest of if, then, else rules, which is typically what a traditional rules engine requires. This has massive implications for how you will maintain your system, if you can imagine. So if you can define just the problem itself in a very intuitive way and at a high level, rather than having to implement specific rules for every single tiny case, it means that you can introduce new products and they'll be supported through the product data setups rather than through new rules. So imagine your rules are all set up to support 10 products, and those rules specify every single case of what to do with those 10 products. Now you add the 11th product, it may break all those rules. And then who's maintaining that? That ends up being, in my experience, that's a huge, complex, and difficult process to handle. And we see that actually in the field all the time. Like it's very common. Again, we can generate a complete solution of any complexity, any size at a single click. So look for that kind of capability. If you can find that in a vendor, then that's extremely powerful. Again, for your users, imagine the sales user who isn't interested in clicking through every single detail. They want to see a solution based on partial information, do things quickly. Doing things quickly is everything. That's time to market. That's also usability. That's also going to drive your user adoption. Because when they're coming from a spreadsheet and they're used to doing things how they want, they don't want to sit here and wait for a tool to come back with the answer. So we've actually seen real customer implementations that take over a minute to just do simple pricing on a handful of products. So look for those things. If you can find a solution or a technology that can solve everything in one click, you want to look seriously at that. And again, what I was saying is that it's much simpler to set up a few rules, a few heuristics that drive your configuration. With the Veloce engine, what it means is the engine is doing the bulk of the work rather than the data setups. It means that a business person can just define things as they are, define your products as they are, declare their attributes, and not have to define a massive set of complex rules to maintain your system. So in terms of pricing, that's your second part of the CPQ puzzle. You want to look at, pretty much all the major vendors will be able to support the typical pricing models for usage, promotion, but so you want to see what are the ones that you need. So things like ARR calculation, and even certain usage models. It depends on really what you need. But yeah, again, it goes back to the earlier point. Come with your specific use cases and see if the software supports that, or does it require customization? Once you start stepping into customization, you're in a world of potential trouble. So also look for something like a pricing procedure. So Veloce has what's called a pricing procedure. It's highly flexible. It drives the whole pricing process. So rather than implementing many types of matrices, we can actually have a simple logical process at the core of your pricing, which will support all the different variations. And then it also lends itself to much easier maintenance of the system because you have to have fewer rules involved. So much like how the solver works on the configuration on the C side. So again, you need to support the different calculation types. Now, extensive pricing or extensible pricing engine versus pricing callback is a super important point. You want to ask about this because what we've seen many times in the field, and this is with leading CPQ technologies, often what happens in the real world is if the company hasn't actually looked at and documented what they really need, what happens then in the implementation is, guess what, things are not supported, and there is a convenient way to handle that, which is writing what we call pricing callbacks, which are basically just third-party customizations. So in the end, you're taking the core technology. We've seen implementations where it's 80 or 90% pricing callbacks, which are extremely expensive, but also, again, you're essentially writing custom code to support your P, and then, which is, okay, you get that done, but then how do you maintain that? And then why did you even buy a vendor technology in the first place? It almost, when you're doing 20% with the platform and 80% with custom code, first of all, who's controlling that custom code? And then why did you buy the vendor technology in the first place? You might have been better just looking at taking your team or whoever's writing those pricing callbacks and just developing your own custom application. So it's extremely important, and we want to differentiate that with an extensible pricing engine. So Veloce pricing engine does have hooks in it because we do realize when we've developed this with our 20 years experience that sometimes there will be things that you don't support out of the box, but make sure that a technology has thought about that up front, and there are ways to do that in more of a seamless way. And check out even put demonstrations of that or ask questions about that. Well, how would you handle, let's say, some XYZ pricing? You know, my company does pricing in some way that's so special, no one else does that way. How will you do that? And then find out. Is it a pricing callback, or is it something that can be done within the engine itself? That's then controlled by the pricing engine and the platform and is not at the whim of whatever is running that callback. So again, when it's extensible, it's more within the framework of the technology, and it should have much better performance. But again, ask about it. Okay, so personalization, like super important. Personalization of the configuration page. Again, don't settle for one size product configuration UI, which is extremely common. Look for the ability to define whatever user interface you need for whatever number of user groups that you have. Also look for the performance that backs that up. So if you're looking for, like, for example, exposing your CPQ to an e-commerce channel, the standards are going to be extremely high for that. So make sure that you can support that with, first of all, a tool that does customization and is able to create that and maintain that, but also with the configurator backend engine performance that will support the kind of user interface and interaction and user experience that is demanded and expected by e-commerce users. So if you take a CPQ system and you just drop on some UI, and we've seen this with technologies, it's touted as it's available. Yeah, sure, we can open it up to any channel. Well, then it actually ends up being, first of all, if it isn't supported in a nice and seamless way, and you need to ask about that. Is there a tool that does that? It ends up being full customization and API calls. Ask about that. Is it API calls, or do you have something built in? And then also look for, is it going to perform in a way that users expect? So let's say we do those API calls and it takes 5 seconds to return a response. That's not going to work for e-commerce. So also look for personalization of the shopping cart. So there is minor customization that's offered on some technologies. There's no customization in some cases. Your shopping cart is extremely important. There should be ways to collapse fields, add fields. and show that in different ways that will correspond to your actual use cases. And then, of course, support for CRM and downstream systems, extremely important. This is probably pretty obvious and something that everyone looks for, but then look for it to be demonstrated for your exact systems, okay? And then going back to what we were saying earlier, best of breed quote-to-cash applications, this is becoming more and more standard. Why? Because each of these areas, CPQ, billing, order management, they're not easy areas. So you want to look for the companies that do that best, because APIs and pluggability and integration is really de facto standard. It's everything can be typically connected, but there should be out-of-the-box connections available between common platforms. So then the question is, why would you buy everything? Don't be led astray by the idea that a company can provide everything, because we haven't actually seen that. You really need to question that. And then the best of breed systems can be and are typically connected, and you'll have examples of that, and look for the ones that actually pertain to your environment. Also look for asset and subscription management support depending on what you need. Look ahead, not just configuring once, but in the future, what's going to happen with an upgrade. This is, or rather, how are your renewals handled? Super important, huge use cases, which are often neglected and have taken tons. We've seen companies spend tons and tons of money and effort to come up with these solutions through a lot of customization or product changes over time. And look for that, because renewal is a huge area. What happens after the initial cycle? And so look for a seamless and a well-executed handling of the whole asset life cycle. And also order management. Again, should order management and billing super critical, especially for SaaS systems, you need to make sure that you have very good support for that with the technologies either that you've selected or that your vendor can help you select. So industry specialization. So, again, starting with our intelligence solver and a very flexible framework for developing our product models and how to handle that, we're able to have multiple industry vertical applications. And what that means is that, so we've seen companies that start in one area and then they add on another. So for example, companies that specialize in contract management, then bolt on a CPQ. That's kind of going back to the best of breed thing, but also it's very important. For example, companies that have built their whole CPQ around a single use case. So for example, SaaS. So there are a number of companies that have done that, and then later they find that retweaking it to handle, let's say, data center design or hardware configuration is next to impossible. And so look for that, and depending on your needs, of course. So if you have some hardware configuration that may be useful, or you're changing your hardware, let's say selling to software, you might not be able to do that all in one shot. Look for, is the technology really going to be, is it designed for one thing and then tweaked and pulled and hacked to do other things? Or has it been designed in a way that can be very flexibly applied to all these different use cases? So that's what we've done with Veloce. We support high-tech manufacturing, very complex data center infrastructure, hardware and software design process, solving it all in one click, and also software as a service, which is typically where a lot of the companies have started, but then they have a very hard time extending their technology to these areas. And also, if you're in telecom, make sure that the software supports and was designed in a way that isn't just demoware, but rather supports telecom, if that's your area. So time to market, you want to look for things that will speed up your time to market. So one of the core things we touched on earlier was, how is the product modeled? When we say product, we're encompassing all your products as I mentioned, is it going to require a month to set up a new product, or can it be done seamlessly? Look for this, because we've seen leading technologies where actually we've been told in current implementations that it takes weeks and months to add a new product. So what are the things that can accelerate that? Things like user interface templates. That is, if you even have a technology that supports multiple user interfaces. Again, templates to drive your model configuration and best practices. So it isn't, they're not just doing this for the first time. Clear separation of concern. What does that mean? The more modular the CPQ tool is designed to be, the more resources can work in parallel without breaking the process. So that's super, super important, because what we've seen with even very, I would say, leading technologies is that it becomes, again, a large, complex nest where you actually have to have a view of the entire system to be able to implement a new product. So that's not the way it should be. As I was describing the use case of having 10 products, how do you add the 11th? But of course, it's usually 10 times that. And then it makes sure that it doesn't break everything. If you have to write a rule that says, do this for a product, my new product X, but then I also have to write, and if it's product A through Y, do these things, then you're in trouble. And that's actually super, super common. So look for that. And then personalization, again, build with your end users in mind to accelerate adoption. Adoption is super important. So if you're going to spend all this money and time and effort on building a CPQ technology, make sure that it's actually going to end up being used by your end users. And that means, and they're going to be a critical bunch. And if they're salespeople, they don't care about technology per se. They're used to using things like spreadsheets. They're used to having a lot of flexibility. So spreadsheets, guess what? They offer pretty much infinite flexibility depending on how they're done. And they're also super high performance. And they can be tweaked, and macros can be developed, and they can do quite a lot. So you're going to have a very critical audience. So don't assume because you bought what was considered the Magic Quadrant leader that all your users will love that tool. Look for the ability to personalize, and on top of an engine that's high performance. And again, support for all your up and downstream systems. I think we mentioned that several times before. Look for things like automatic data migration. So what that means is that if you have an existing legacy system, or you need to move data between one place and another, but again, back to the legacy system, there's actually some technologies like Veloce where we actually can look at an existing legacy CPQ implementation. We can instantly read that and then spawn a configurator in our technology. Look for those kinds of things. You'd be surprised they might exist. And then look for pluggability, out-of-the-box integration support. Certainly, most qualified vendors should have done this before, because what you're using probably has some commonality with other companies. And then when you're going to implement, look for professional services and a team that's done it before, been there, done that, right? So they should have a track record of multiple successful CPQ implementations, and I would say ideally on a number of platforms, because they see all the pitfalls. They can also help you in the selection process if you bring them in earlier. And then, of course, they should have their own best practices, and they should have success-based outcomes. That is, you should have trackability. There should be metrics, not just nice words. So in summary, when we're looking at CPQ and where the effort is applied during implementation, what we've often seen is that after a lot of nice demos and nice words, what happens is that about 30% on average, around 30% of the actual product configuration can be handled out of the box with the existing tools. You've got things like integration, that's going to be pretty static, okay? There's always some effort in integration, don't think there isn't. And then there's also, but what you don't, and there's probably about 10% that you just buffer, you just don't know what that's going to be. But you don't want only 30% to be of your problem to be supported by the existing technology. What we often see is that's about the case. And then you end up getting into the red area of 40% custom development. And again, if you don't know why that's a problem, come back and talk to us. But that it's all about how do you maintain that? And how does that affect, and then why did you buy a vendor technology in the first place? So Veloce, what we're seeing is that we can do roughly 60+% out of the box. And you can see the red is much, it should be something like 5%. And we can take away Veloce from here. If you find a company or technology that can support this model, this is really what you should be aiming for. Again, integration pretty static. We're just going to leave that there. But you want to be able to use the out-of-the-box tools and minimize your custom development, simply because if you're going to do a lot of custom development, you'd probably be better off just starting out from scratch and building a system that corresponds to your exact use cases and how you know them and your product roadmap. So if you're going to take a screenshot of anything in this presentation, take it of this slide. This is a URL where you can look at Veloce Intelligent Solver in action. So check it out. We've been talking a lot about it, but it's a very short, easy, digestible demo. And you can see it in action, and it runs in Salesforce in ways and speeds that you won't be familiar with if you're familiar with CPQ. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Pratik I'm actually going to stop sharing here. And Pratik is a leader from Standav, system integrator, and he can lead you through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, everyone. This is Pratik. Can the team hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. So that was great. I think we got lots of insights on the value of having the right tool, making sure that the functionality and the requirements are mapped, and a lot of the things that we learned around making sure that you not only see the front end but the back end. I think that resonates really well. So my name is Pratik. I am one of the co-founders and partners at Standav. We are implementing code-to-cash solutions. We have done multiple complex use cases. We have done it across multiple industries. And we are really excited to talk to the Veloce team and understand the value they have provided. And we are definitely working with them in some of our common clients where we work and ensure that the success is jointly delivered. So what you're seeing today is assessment framework. So a lot of times the selection for code-to-cash CPQ systems is already made, but you essentially might not be getting full value. And there could be vendors that are maybe running out of business, or vendors that no longer support the features they had promised you in the roadmap. So one of the key things that we are working towards is coming up with assessment framework that looks at what are the customizations that might have been done, how do we ensure that the value that was promised is delivered, and then look at the new features and provide an analysis on how you can essentially either add a solution like Veloce on top of your existing investment or replace them. Because end of the day, the way I see this is as a system integrator, our loyalty is with our clients, and we want our clients to be successful. It's a combination of product, process, and people. So when it comes to products, we take an approach where there are other products out there that may meet your requirements, but think of what we're talking about Veloce as an opportunity to add more value. We also want to make sure that processes are in place, because you can have the best product in the world, but if your processes are broken, you need to fix those. And obviously people, right? Participation of people, both from a steering company perspective to ensure that the value is there, and also from a perspective of the skills, right? Because there has to be a level of understanding of what is available in a functionality, what should be customized, and what should not be, right? So you definitely need a combination of product, people, and process to be successful. So one of the key things that we are seeing where people use a solution like Veloce on top of the more popular CPQ tools is introducing new products, right? So for example, you are doing M&As, you're buying companies. Every company that you buy has to integrate it. Or you have raised a lot of capital. You want to introduce new products. New product introduction is, I think, one of the most overlooked feature in CPQ. In the manufacturing term, you could look at PLM solutions where you can create product SKUs. But now PLM itself is getting disrupted, and we feel as an SI that new product introduction should be a functionality that should exist as part of your core CPQ offering. So identifying the product change management process, understanding the product change, and mapping those features, these kind of map to what I mentioned, the people and the process. But when it comes to systems, what is exciting is when we look at systems like Veloce, we see that they have an awesome way to manage their masters data around products. You really need a master data management for products and pricing if you want to introduce new products quickly. You absolutely need to have some sort of a normalized view between the different systems because you could be using upstream systems for marketing, downstream systems for ERP, and then making sure the deployment happens, right? So new product introduction is the biggest value that one can get, but having a really robust CPQ system. But oftentimes it is overlooked. And in order to make sure your sales team is more effective and efficient, I think this adds a lot of value. The other interesting thing, what we're seeing is service management. Service management use cases are situations where you are able to sell and bundle services on top of hardware products or software products. So think of Cisco, where they are selling hardware. They want to bundle some sort of a SaaS offering, but they also want to sell professional services. There could be use cases where you want to add elements of professional services as part of recurring revenue, which is more around managed services. So these things are something that are not well thought through. When we look at solutions, we definitely encourage you not to ignore professional services or services if they're add-on to your products, because oftentimes when you're implementing CPQ, you will end up only configuring the product SKUs and essentially creating an order line for your products, and implementing services is an afterthought. It could be a simple line item that is done outside the system, maybe an Excel sheet. But if you have that integrated, I think it'll add a lot of value. So that's one of the key things that we feel that can help the clients. And then what I want to conclude is if you are looking at SaaS, and when I say SaaS, some of these are actually relevant for software companies that are selling subscription, and some of them are actually relevant for any businesses that is disrupting the whole subscription model, right? So when you look at subscription-based use cases, there is a lot of value that billing or systems like Zora can bring. But when you look at CPQ, I feel that's one of the often missed activities. So you should definitely look at subscription-based SaaS use cases right during your CPQ implementation, especially when you have location-based quoting or when you have complex renewals, right? So we feel that in order to get more value from your CPQ system, the key thing is to look at use cases that are relevant for your not only the existing business, but your future business, ensuring that you are able to bundle both products and services, and also to ensure that if you're introducing new products, you have a really robust mechanism to do that in a fast way. So as Tomo was saying in the beginning of our webinar, this is a two-part webinar. The part one was what we are doing today, which is to talk about how to make sure that you choose the right CPQ system, and then what are some of the trends we see as an SI. I think in part two, we'll do a deeper dive and share more use cases from an implementation perspective that we are seeing, and some of the elements that we feel a solution like Veloce can do really well when it comes to adding or enhancing your existing investment of CPQ, as well as making sure that adding them in the beginning, I feel, will also add a lot of value, especially compared to other products that are on top of the Magic Quadrant. We feel they can meet or even exceed some of the requirements. So with that, I'll pause here. I'll let our organizer come back and discuss the next steps. And we really are excited to have the second series done soon. And thanks everyone for the participation. And really exciting to see how the community is coming together and everybody's sharing so much information. So thanks a lot, everyone. So with that, I'll pause and give the control back to our organizers. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Pratik, and we will be waiting for the second part of this so that we can kind of figure out on more on your side as well. So on that note, thank you so much, Pratik and Greg from Stand Up and Veloce, respectively, for the great talk. And now it's time to open up Q&A. So for all the audience members out there should be a function for you to send in a question, and we'll have our moderators in the chat answer or have Pratik and Greg take the stead. So please feel free to type down your questions and we'll get to it as soon as possible right now. So we'll take maybe a minute or two to get all the questions happening and we can start answering. One question here, I think this might be for Pratik. The question is, what are some performance challenges in CPQ?
Yeah, I think it's definitely not just for me, but for Greg. But I'll go ahead and I'll let Greg chime in. But from a SI perspective, we see issues with performance with a lot of well-known CPQ systems around customizations of pricing. So every time you're trying to calculate and recalculate your changes in the cart, it definitely impacts a lot, and it has got to do with where the architecture is. But performance definitely has a very big impact on usability. Usability has a direct impact on the ROI. So the whole value of essentially getting more effective and efficient salespeople is irrelevant if they never use the system or the system takes forever. So I'll let Greg add on how performance can be improved, but I definitely want to address that it is one of the biggest concerns we see, especially for larger clients that go live and the performance actually gets worse over time. But I'll stop here and let Greg chime in.
Yeah, thank you, Pratik. Yeah, the first key is that the technology should be able to support what you're trying to do. And that if you're doing a lot of customizations, especially as Pratik said on the pricing side, then you're entering into custom code and you really don't have control over that. We've seen vendors, we've seen implementations by leading vendors for companies right here in the Valley who have less than 10 products. And it takes, we've seen this, it takes over a minute to run the pricing on 6 products. Why? Because the code is going off and it's calling some other jar file somewhere, some other system. This is super, super common stuff. So what you need to do is actually look at, okay, when you're doing your vendor evaluation, first of all, ask all the right questions. How are you going to support my pricing process? Then in terms of on the configuration side, so again, don't take anyone's word on it. Even if we say we're fast or anyone says they're fast, look at it with your actual data and your actual problem. So if you got something like you want to configure 1,000 products or 10,000 products. First of all, you might want to ask the question, why is it necessary to do that? That would be your first optimization. But the second is, okay, let's plug in my data. Let's do a test. And if they can't do that, then there might be a problem there as well. So just look at your exact problem, your type of data, and try and map it to the technology and then see. And the way to speed it up is, well, first of all, don't take people's word on it, but actually test it out.
I'll just do a quick rundown on some of these questions right here. So will this presentation be sent out after the webinar? Yes, it will. And there will also be a recording, so we will send that out. And Sagar from Encapsulate does have a question. I believe this is for Greg. The question is, pretty sure the Veloce tool handle multi-currency?
Yes, we do. Actually, we can handle multi-currency in the same quote, which is not commonly handled. So we have a clear separation actually between our quote line items and our price line items. And we can also handle multi-currency. We can also handle different charge types in the same product. And we've seen that's a problem as well. So we have very flexible pricing models based on our background, working with multiple vendor technologies and looking at a lot of different user or rather customer problems. So yes, we can handle multi-currency.
Awesome. So we do have another question from Sandhya. I believe this is for Pratik. So Pratik, you were referring to best practices of the CPQ implementer. Can you give us some examples of that?
Yeah, so I think part of it is got to do with your project management. So these are related to your process and people. So some of the best practices are essentially to make sure you have well-defined requirements. You also have well-defined communication plan. And I think it is no different than any complex transformation project. It is not an IT project or a business project. I think it's a project where you have cross-functional stakeholders. Now, when it comes to the specific on CPQ and the product, I think the key thing is to educate the customers early on. A lot of times we have pre-built templates where we are able to come in and showcase how the system looks like. In order to elicit requirements, you need to do that. Otherwise, if you are implementing a CPQ system and they are used to an old legacy system that was, let's say, on-prem, like Siebel, the requirements might not be accurate, and you really need to kind of question and focus on the why. And it has to be like a funnel where you need to go deeper to really figure out what is the business impact versus translating a wrong or a bad process from one system to other. So those are some of the high-level best practices. But obviously, if you have a tool and a support that Greg and his team have built, then it makes our life really easy.
Awesome. Thank you, Pratik. So we also have another question here from Rich from Hitachi Vantara. So I'm pretty sure this is for Greg. So the question is, discuss proposal generation and how it is handled within Veloce and how proposal templates are coded.
Okay, great question. And this is like really important, of course, for any CPQ that you have to, typically you have to hand something to your customer. So how do you generate the document? So right now we're working with a Microsoft sort of design tool. So it's based, you can handle putting different types or parts of your quote in different sections, and you can customize that with whatever logos you want. We actually, that's I would say our V1. We actually want to move to a more web-based solution, and rather than marking up Microsoft documents. And we're actually looking at different vendors to integrate with to do that. So it's something that is it's critical and important. But it's something we can handle very easily once we integrate with the right technologies.
Awesome. So we also have one question from Deepa. So either of you can probably take this one. So what are the key things to consider when a vendor or IT is trying to translate the calculator into a configurator?
Ooh, that's can I take that one?
Yeah, it's up to anyone.
We'll talk about it. But first of all, if you have a calculator, that's awesome because you have some existing logic. So then I would do a deep dive with a vendor, and first of all, you should probably be able to extract some requirements from it. Reverse engineering is not always the best approach. It really depends. So you know your calculator, you know the logic, but at least that's a great starting point. You have something existing. If you don't have it documented, you should probably go to the process of documenting. You also might find that whatever's been implemented, this is a great opportunity to optimize it. And then you need to look at, okay, it's really simple. Will that configurator platform support the calculations that you need even after you've gone through a streamlining and simplification? And if that is true, that's great. Then try and get them to demo some subset of that. Probably they won't build the whole thing for you for free, but look at that, kick the tires and find out, and look at, okay, or are they writing a bunch of custom code? That probably is not ideal. Or can they handle the logic of your calculator with declarative rules and constraints? So the Veloce engine actually handles any kind of logical and mathematical expression in declarative point and click model. And that is a difficult thing to support, actually. I haven't seen it to that same extent in other technologies. So we would love, if you have that problem, bring it to us. We would love to see that. And we would love to and show you how we can do it seamlessly and easily and in a maintainable way. Because if you're going to end up just writing a bunch of procedural custom code to handle that, then you may not really be benefiting from that that technology. And then lastly, look at performance, right? So once something is done, I mean, make them go through it and again, see that it performs, so you can do it's maintainable, and that it's presentable in a way that works for your company.
Okay, great. So I think we have time for one last question. I think this might be for Greg as well. So what ways can you avoid custom code, more in general speaking?
Yeah, the real key is to know what your problem is and also where it's going, especially where, well, both parts, right? So your problem will probably be changing over time. And then you want to work with you want to work with that vendor, with people who understand how the technology works. And then again, don't be impressed just by a few demos. Look at your specific problem, dig into it, and then ask them to demonstrate how would they solve very specific things. So again, I'll tell you, this company that we're selling into, this potential customer, they're a Fortune 10 company. They're super smart. They kick the tires. They had very specific use cases. So that's the way to avoid that, because I think that with the companies where there was a lot of custom code written, that was definitely not the expectation going in. And why was that not the expectation? Is because they were really sold on something that did not demonstrate a priori their actual problem. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had that misexpectation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Greg, as well as Proti, for all those very insightful answers to our audience's questions. So pretty much we will be ending our webinar about now. Again, thank you everyone for joining our CPQ Strategies webinar. You will be receiving an email with the webinar collaterals, as well as a recording of this webinar, so you can share it to all of your peers, as well as contact information for both StandUp and Veloce. And also, by the way, next Thursday, Veloce and StandUp will be partnering up with the QDC community for an event named QDC Horror Stories. And for all those in the Bay Area, feel free to come on by, and we will be sending details for that as well. So for further information and questions, please feel free to contact us, and we will see you soon in our next webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in.